So over the last few years, students had been providing us with feedback that within developmental psychology, there were, compared to other courses that they were doing, a lot of concepts and a lot of theories that they had to learn. So I started doing a bit of research. One of the books that I came across was a book about teaching developmental psychology. And within that book, they talked about a range of different teaching models that the authors had trialled, and one of those was interteaching. What I liked about interteaching, it was quite behavioural, so it fitted within the behavioural psychology model, and it had also been something that had been found to increase students' engagement, and something that looked to me like it could assist students to learn information sort of over time. Interteaching was described as a model where students are provided with lots of feedback about what they're learning, and it fits with the flipped classroom model that many people are talking about at the moment. So the idea is that students are expected to prepare before coming along to class, and during class they're given feedback on how well they're progressing with acquiring that knowledge.
We would briefly discuss the reading, then the tutor would break us into small groups, and we would sit around in groups and we might do an activity which included drawing with colour textures on paper, or it might include designing models to help us learn different aspects of what we'd been reading.
So one of the benefits of this model for the students is that when they come along to class, they need to extend on what it is that they've learnt in their reading. So they need to apply it to a case study, they might engage in a role play, where they need to get into character as a parent or a teacher and think about the relevance of what it is that they've learnt.
So what would happen was you get that real base learning at home or in your own time, to get real base of it, and then you would go outside and go into the class and just solidify that. That's what really helped me. And the model would really encourage you to really engage with the material, really engage to get that deep learning as opposed to that surface learning.
At the end of each class, we would have a feedback sheet we would fill out, and we would provide that to the tutor, which would go back to Mandy. On that sheet, we would put things that we hadn't completely understood in class.
I saw that it was really important to get feedback continually from students on a weekly basis about where they were at. Because there's no point waiting until the end of semester and finding out that students haven't caught on to some of the really, the major theories or constructs, the things that you're teaching them. You've lost your opportunity to teach them what they need to know by that stage. So gathering information on an ongoing basis allows you to fill in the gaps in students' knowledge throughout the semester.
So those feedback sheets, they're a good way to sort of monitor where you were at, monitor what you were doing, what you were comfortable with, and also monitor the things that you might need a bit more work on. So I think they were a good monitoring device, and they kept you on track and put everything into perspective, let you saw the big picture of where you were at in the course and what you needed to work on.
So I use those questions on the interteaching feedback sheet to allow the students to reflect on their own learning and on the learning of their peers. And I thought, well, if there's some other students in their group that week who are demonstrating more knowledge, then I thought that might be helpful for the students to reflect on that as well. So a way of them to reflect on their own process, their own learning process, but maybe to notice what other students are doing and maybe learning from more prepared peers about what they might do next time.
You're referring to people who are like you, and they're probably going to explain it on your level. So in a way, I think that's it's a fresh way to learn. I think it's a good way to learn.
So based on that information that students provide, all of that data was collated, and from that we developed up lecture content that was delivered as podcasts for the students.
And should make those modules based upon our feelings, based upon what we wanted. And they were really helpful. Again, it was that whole solidification. It was another step. So you went from the readings, which was that base, then to the class, which was solidifying, and then also her modules, which was supplementary to that.
So it was similar content to what I would present in a lecture format, but it was just one chunk of information. So students could access that information alone if they knew that that was something that they needed to follow up on.
So the modules are good in a way because they enable sort of the students to have some part in designing the course or designing their learning. I think if it's just one way and the lecturer is designing everything and they're not getting the feedback, it's not what we're necessarily wanting out of the course. So I think it's good. It's that whole collaboration between the lecturer and the students.
I was more interested in a model that allowed students over time to develop up an awareness of their own learning. So to be able to reflect on whether they were gaining the full understanding. So we knew that if we didn't tie the interteaching discussion and their contribution during class to assessment, that it would be less likely that students would do that preparation.
So the course basically gave you an incentive to read. As you were marked on it, it gave you that real push to read as opposed to the other subjects where you weren't marked on that concept.
Our tutors are used to coming along to tutes and having to drag the answers out of students sometimes, and the interteaching model meant that they didn't have to do that. So students were coming along to class, they had done the preparation that we would normally expect, but the reason they'd done that is because they knew that it was tied to the assessment process and they knew that it was going to be noticed. So sometimes, even though we set up the expectations that students need to be prepared, there's no consequences, positive or negative, about that. So students certainly came along to class much more prepared, and it was a much more enjoyable experience for the tutors as well. So what we found was that the exam grades did increase from the couple of years beforehand when we were using the standard lecture followed by tutorials to the year when we implemented interteaching, that there was a significant increase in exam results.
The model also helped, especially when it came to exam time, as opposed to other courses when you sometimes have to relearn the material. With this model, you had already done all that learning. So exam was just basic revision. Everything was there. It was just a matter of skimming over that material.
Because the way that the model is set up is that students need to prepare, and they need to prepare answers to those kind of questions throughout the semester. So it was no surprise to me that Chris was able to verbalise that and to say that, by the time he got to the exam, he knew his stuff. He didn't have to cram. One of the changes that we did see was that from the beginning of the semester through to the end of semester, there was an increase in students' confidence in speaking up in tutorials and in asking questions of lecturers. So that's quite an important thing, because if students aren't feeling confident to ask questions, they're not going to learn as much. So that was a really good outcome as well. So collecting the feedback from students actually made me feel more confident that what I was teaching was, being accepted by the students, and that it was information that the students were finding interesting, and I could tailor my teaching based on the feedback to make sure that at least there was some components of the teaching that was what was really interesting to them.